we explore the dark and whimsical world of Dolmenwood on today's Plays the Thing. Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. Today we talk about Dolmenwood, a dark and whimsical fairy tale role-playing game written by Gavin Norman and published through his company, Necrotic Gnome. More specifically, this is the play report for our first session of Winter's Daughter, which is a starter adventure also written by Gavin Norman for the setting. I'll break this video up into 4 sections. First, I'll muse on why we chose to play Dolmenwood to begin with. Then I'll share how I prepped for the game. Next, I'll introduce the player characters, and finally, I'll present the play report along with a brief reflection on how I think it went. But before we dive in, if you enjoy this content, please don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and tap the bell icon to get notified whenever I post something new. Okay, so why Dolmenwood? After all, it's a cursed forest setting, and as longtime followers of the channel would know, our group is already playing Shadowdark the Gloaming, which has a somewhat similar vibe. The thing is, we dove into Dolmenwood because our group has had a strong appetite for this type of fantasy for a long time. Also, the game's art captivated my players and me, and I've long appreciated Gavin Norman's approach to adventure design, as he favors situation-based play over story-driven scenarios. So I'd been looking forward to Dolmenwood long before I knew anything about Shadowdark. But the wait for Kickstarter completion was long, and the desire to play in Dark Forest was strong, so we jumped into Kelsey Dion's The Gloaming the moment it and Shadowdark became available, and we've been having a great time with it. We're still running the Gloaming, but it's on hold for a little while as we wait for one of the players to become more available, and I suspect there's only a session or 2 left in that campaign anyway. So it felt like a good time to finally start our Dolmenwood game. Besides, I doubt that Dolmenwood will be more of the same. I've always pictured the Gloaming's demonic forest as something out of a Hammer horror movie from the 1960s and 70s, and Dolmenwood feels more or evokes more fairy tale aspects of fantasy and feels more like the movie Legend. So how did prepping for this game go? Prepping for the game was easy. Dolmenwood is a very fleshed out setting with lots of detail, but these details take the form of places, factions, and monsters that present players with situations to interact with rather than with stories to move through. Furthermore, the game details a rich world wherein these situations unfold, but nothing about the presentation of that world feels limiting or overwhelming to me. It's just enough to provide inspiration and grounding for the game, but not so much that it gets in the way of play. Also, Gavin Norman is a master of organizing information to maximize ease of play. His adventures, for example, use formatting elements like indents and bullet points, bolded text, and reproduced map sections in ways that make it easy for a game master to wield information at the table with only casual glances at the adventure book. Preparing for the game, therefore, meant little more than reading through the player's book to familiarize myself with very general setting info, reading through Winter's Daughter to get its situations more firmly in my mind, and then making a couple of decisions about how I wanted to start the game. The first of those decisions was inspired by the good folks over at the 3D6 Down the Line YouTube channel. Following their example, I chose to preserve Dolmenwood's sense of mystery by limiting all player characters to human ancestry, at least to start. Non-human options will become available once the player characters interact with NPCs of a non-human ancestry during play. My second decision was to share the starting situation with my players before they generated characters. So I told them ahead of time that they should make characters who had accepted a mission from a wizard named Mosselmeyer Druge, and this mission was to journey to an ancient burial mound deep within the woods and retrieve a ring from the person buried there. So armed with this information, what player characters did my players make? Three of my players made very young characters. First up is Mario's character, Sandy. Sandy is a scullery boy with a heart full of adventure. Although he owns a sword and has trained with Prigwort's militia, he hasn't had the chance to prove himself. Yearning for more than kitchen work, Sandy jumped at the opportunity to see where the road might take him when the call for adventure presented itself. He is a fighter by class. Next is Dan's character, Gwendy. Now a 15-year-old girl, Gwendy was lost in the forest as a young child and raised by wolves. Eventually, she returned to the town and reintegrated with society, but she still feels more at home in the wild, which is why she accepted the wizard's mission. She has a wolf brother named Blythe and is a hunter by class. Mike made Nia, a young woman who had recently spent a few weeks lost in the forest herself. She returned eccentric, whimsical, and spouting strange knowledge and lore. Like Wendy, she accepted the wizard's mission because she feels called by the wood, although in somewhat different ways. She is a bard by class. My remaining two players made older, more veteran characters. Lauren made Mordrin, a stalwart warrior of the Plurtine Church. She is serious, steadfast, and dedicated to defending her faith. Despite this, there are rumors circulating about her origins, as nuns found her as an infant on their convent steps. They raised her as their own, but her unknown parentage haunts her both socially and psychologically. Mordrin accepted the wizard's offer, hoping to restore the burial mound as a pilgrimage site for the church. She is a cleric by class. Finally, we have Andrew's character, Cephas. A seasoned sailor, Cephas took a stand against his mates when one of them harassed a young tavern girl in Prigwort. Beat up and left behind for his troubles, Cephas pursued other ventures and jumped at the wizard's offer due to his need for coin. He is a fighter by class. Okay, so with our cast in place, let's see what happened when we actually played. First thing I want to say is that I asked the characters, or the players I should say, if they wanted their characters to do anything before they set off. Were they going to research something? Were they going to do anything in particular to prepare? And they said, no, beyond just some basic outfitting, I think we're just going to jump right in. So we began a few days after the characters left the village of Prigwort, where the wizard, Mosselmeyer Druge, had hired them to the tune of about 5,000 gold pieces. So they were already in the wood when we opened the game. As they ventured deeper into the wood, the brambles thickened and gnarled hazel and oak trees crowded close, their branches twisting overhead and their roots tangling beneath the adventurers' feet as if the forest itself wished to hold them back. Suddenly, the characters heard a metallic sound up ahead. Without a second thought, Sandy drew his sword and pressed forward through the tangled path in a mode that became quite consistent throughout the game. Behind him, Gwendy and Mordrin shared a wary look before flanking him to either side, advancing with far more caution. 30 paces behind them, Cephas walked with quiet footsteps, while Nia lingered even farther behind him, her gaze drifting towards hidden sights only she could sense. As Sandy reached the edge of a small clearing, he halted at the glade's edge, struck by what he saw. Suspended from the twisted trees hung crude metal cutouts of owls, rust-streaked with rain and with hollow eyes carved into pentagrams. The metal figures swung in the wind, clanking together to make the sounds that the characters had heard just moments earlier. The party would ultimately recognize these cutouts as symbols of the Droon, who are mysterious wizards that are rumored to perform secret rites in the wood. Just beyond the owl cutouts, Sandy spotted a circle of 7 trilithons, each 7 feet tall and etched with eldritch runes. Within the ancient stone circle, sprawled on the ground, lay a stag twitching erratically. Its coat was streaked with bright green slime, and 60 feet beyond the stone circle loomed a flat-topped hillock. Pausing to take in the strange sight, Sandy tightened his grip on his sword and strode forward towards the stone ring, his eyes fixed on the twitching stag. Approaching the stag, Sandy tried to spot the source of its unnatural convulsions, but the creature seemed to be twitching all on its own, an acrid haze rising from its slime-coated fur and causing Sandy to feel lightheaded as he stood over the corpse. As the others reached the tree line, Mordrin came in from Sandy's right. She scowled at the strange metal owls across the glade, and then with a quick draw, she let an arrow or a bolt fly at them, but it missed its target, which caused her to frown even more. From the left, Gwendy and Blythe approached Sandy, and crouching low, Gwendy spotted a faint trail of evaporating slime leading into the forest. As for Cephas, upon arriving at the tree line, he took up a watchful position, scanning the glade to ensure that they remained unseen or at least unsurprised by any lurking threats. And Nia came up behind him. When her eyes landed on the trilithons, they widened with sudden and inexplicable recognition. This, she realized, was the sight of Sir Chide, a famous human knight who helped settle the Dolmenwood centuries prior. Joining her companions, Nia then told them the story. Once upon a time, a powerful fairy lord known as the Cold Prince ruled over all of Dolmenwood, shrouding it in eternal winter until mortals rose up against him in a war that raged 9 centuries ago. Sir Chide had been a hero in that war and, as legend told, he had fallen deeply in love with a sorceress known as the Lady of the Wood. They pledged their hearts to one another, exchanging engagement rings beneath the shadows of Dolmenwood's trees, but Sir Chide fell on the high wold during the final battle with the Fey armies. As he died, the knight decreed that his men bury him where he lay in the forest he had fought to protect. As for the Lady of the Wood, she was said to have vanished. After listening to the legend, the group debated their next steps. Some considered following the slime trails into the woods, while others advocated heading for the hillock. But before they could really decide, Sandy took matters into his own hands. Declaring that he'd seen and heard enough, he marched towards the hillock decisively. The others exchanged glances and followed with some reluctant sighs. When they arrived at the hillock, they noticed a large slab of granite partially obscured by twisted tangles of brambles and wild roses. Reasoning that the slab served as a door for the barrow mound that Mosselmeyer Druge had sent them to find, they combined their efforts to push it aside, revealing a shadowy descent into the hill. The group then lit a lantern, illuminating stone steps which ended in a dust-choked stone chamber 20 feet below. After a careful descent, they stood clustered before the archway of the chamber and looked inside. In each corner, they saw a plinth bearing a religious relic covered in a sickly yellowish mold. The relics included a silver holy symbol in the shape of a chape, a small wooden statue of a cherub, a heavy holy book titled The Doctrine of St. Sedge, and a thick, unlit candle. Directly across from the stairs were a set of double doors streaked with dampness and closed tight. Above those doors was an inscription that read, "Those most dear," and finally, to their left and right, narrow passages beckoned, each only 5 feet wide and leading deeper into the tomb's depths. Stepping into the room, the party barely had a moment to adjust when the relic suddenly rose into the air, filling the chamber with shrill voices that scolded them for disturbing the sanctity of the tomb. Then, without warning, the objects hurled themselves at the characters, save for at Mordrin, who alone seemed to be spared their anger. The adventurers fought back, and in the chaos some cool things happened. One of them was that Mordrin reached out and caught the silver chape in midair, and by sheer force of will or perhaps faith, she held it steady, and her calm seemed to tame the holy object and subdue its wrath. The adventurers destroyed the remaining relics, but with each blow, the mold covering the relics exploded into a burst of spores that choked them and sent them into fits of coughing and wheezing. Nevertheless, they were successful, and when the dust settled, they took a moment to gather themselves and turn their attention to the eerie surroundings again, uncertain of what further mysteries this ancient tube would hold. So what are my closing thoughts? Overall, I felt like this session was a success. It was straightforward. We didn't delve too deeply into the adventure, but the players enjoyed their characters and I enjoyed their characters, and those characters in their own ways embodied the spirit of what Dolmenwood invites. That said, I had some concerns going in. The game balances between being darkly whimsical and potentially very lethal. It is, after all, a BX-inspired system, and I wondered how my players were reconciling those aspects. First, did they realize that the game could be so deadly? They're experienced gamers, so I assume that they did, but I wasn't sure. Secondly, if they did realize it, were they okay with that lethality, given how invested they seemed in their characters? As the session unfolded, I couldn't help but think that if any of these characters died, maybe some more than others, it might not align with what the players were expecting or hoping for out of this game. But when the first session ended, I thought, you know what? So far, so good. The adventure feels appropriately pitched for what it promises. I mean, unlike the Caves of Chaos, for example, which can be an absolute meat grinder, Winter's Daughter focuses more on exploration, puzzles, and later on social interactions, and although there are a few combat encounters sprinkled in here and there, they're not too terrible. The first session anyway went very smoothly, and that was good, but I gotta tell you, as somebody who's already played through sessions 2 and 3, I can say that some of the concerns that I am voicing right now came to a head during episode 2 or session 2 and gave me some interesting problems to wrestle with. But that's a story for another day. I'm going to conclude this video now, and I'm going to thank you for staying around till the end. Also, I'll remind you that if you enjoyed this video and want to see more, subscribe to the channel, like the video, tap on that bell icon, and tune in next time. In the meantime, I'm going to share the wish that I always share for all of you, and that is that I wish you good health, I wish you good cheer, and I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.